I'll have to find another scapegoat, Robert. It's fun to have a scapegoat.
Or you could just tell yourself nobody knows what any of this is. Yeah.
Done. Okay, now I think we're streaming. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Starting 4 minutes late, but that's okay. Yeah, so now I will do an introduction. So this is Nothing Happening for Nothing Media. I am Art Pinsof. Today I have a special guest, very special guest, Robert Saltzman, author of the very wonderful books, The 10,000 Things and Depending on No Thing. I recently recorded a 3-hour plus discussion with Robert that will be released shortly in full on my own new YouTube channel. And there will be, the first part of it will show up on Nothing Media here. So you'll all be notified. And if the first hour of it isn't enough and you want to see the full thing, it'll have a link to see our full discussion. So today will actually be a follow-up discussion to that. The first hour of which I have a bunch of notes of things I would like to try to cover with Robert. And then in the second hour, we will open it up to discussion. So if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to write your question or comment into the live chat. And you can also there should be a link there on YouTube where you could join us here in the Zoom meeting. And I will facilitate people to be unmuted an hour in for that purpose. So with that being said, as the introduction, I want to say welcome, Robert. Great to have you here.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be back with you again so soon. We had a great chat the other day and left me with quite a few interesting ideas. And I was telling a fan of yours that at first I was really put off by your interviewing style, which, you know, it seemed to wander all over the map. But after I got into it, I found that it was really spacious and helpful in a way that's unusual. So kudos. You're off to a good start here in the interviewing business.
Well, thank you very much, Robert. I appreciate that. I really do. And so at the very last minute before our previous interview, after a week of writing down notes, I came up with the first question, which just came to me again an hour ago. And the first question I want to start this meeting with is to ask you, I can elaborate on this if you want, but my basic question to you is, what is duality?
What is duality?
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. I think we need to start with perception. Perception is the way we have of knowing anything, knowing the world. We perceive sensory data, we perceive our thoughts and feelings, and in that way we make a picture of reality. But that picture evolved not so that we could know reality, but so that we could operate as the animals we are in the physical space that we inhabit, care for our bodies, get the food and water that we need and all of this. So if I'm hungry and I see an apple on a tree and I reach out and pick it and bite it, so I perceive the apple on the tree, and then I perceive myself biting it, and I perceive the taste of the apple and all the rest of it. That's a construct. It's based on many assumptions that are built into us, that we evolved to carry those assumptions. We don't really know what an apple is. We don't really know if an apple truly exists, except on the animal level. The cosmologists and physicists are telling us that perhaps even the particles that they used to discuss a few years ago don't really exist, but are only probabilities in a field, whatever that would mean. I could go into what that means because I've read on that subject, but that's not really the point here.
Yeah.
The point is that we are constructing our reality all the time. And this is so ingrained that we don't even notice it. Even if we make an effort to notice it, it's hard to get off that level and to say to myself, I'm looking at a computer screen and art seems to be there, but really it's just dancing pixels. So there's no art in the screen. No, that won't work. I need to now assume that you are there, otherwise we can't really have a conversation. And this is what we do in regards to everything in the physical, emotional, and mental world. We have axioms, we have certain assumptions, and on a certain level they work. They evolve to work. So what we see is a drastically simplified picture, where there is apparent causality. I reach out and pick up my coffee cup and I say, I picked up the coffee cup. I caused that cup to come into my hand and raise it to my mouth so I can drink. I assume that causality, but that's a simplified picture. The actual causality may lie on a different level entirely, of which I am not aware and of which I cannot become aware.
Yeah.
Am I making that clear so far?
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay. Well, that entire picture depends on duality. For example, there is me and the coffee cup. They're not the same. In order to have coffee, I have to perform an action, a dualistic action. I do something with a cup. So I'm here, the cup is over there, and there's an action that connects us. That's duality. So everything that occurs to us on any level whatsoever is dualistic, obviously. So to take it down to a more basic level, I discussed you on the screen. I'm seeing a picture. I've never met you in person, but I'm assuming that this is more or less what you look like. It's a fair assumption based on previous experience. But really what's happening here on a deeper level of causality is a string of ones and zeros is being produced at an extremely rapid rate that we cannot possibly take in because we did not evolve on that level of speed. And that strings of ones and zeros is describing at every moment what each of these pixels on my highly detailed screen with millions of pixels, how it's lit, what color it is, etc. This is all being generated by a string of ones and zeros. We know this, yes? This is,
yeah.
Okay. Well, we take that for granted. But 1 and 0 is dualistic. The switch is either on or off. Our entire computer system in this world is based on duality. It's either on or it's off. If there were no duality, if it was just a string of zeros, the screen would be blank. There's no information in non-duality. It's a nothing. It's a non-entity. There is no information in non-duality. There aren't any ones, there's only zeros. It's not 2, it's just 1. There's no information in 1, nothing, it's empty. So when people say that something is dualistic, the question that arises in my mind, and it's been part of my critique of this whole non-dual situation, is there's no information. So what are you talking about? Now, I understand that on a naive level, it's possible for someone to say, well, this is all one. After all, if there were no clouds in the sky, there'd be no rain. If there were no rain, there'd be no trees. If there were no trees, there'd be no clouds in the sky. And you see, Robert, it's all one. It's all one. They say that, but it's a really naive view. It's a religious view, not a realistic view. I'm not saying that it's some basic level to which we have no access, that there is no non-dual reality. There may be, but if there is, we don't know anything about it. So when people speak about non-duality, they're speaking emotionally and religiously, and sometimes logically, but they are not ever talking about reality. We have no way of knowing reality. We know our assumptions. We start with assumptions. There's no way to perceive anything without axioms to begin with. And if someone starts with the naive axiom, it's all one, and I say, well, how do you know that? And they say, well, the great teachers throughout time all said that. Well, in the first place, they didn't all say that. They said many things. Some of them said that. But why do you believe them? Why? On what basis? So duality is this. Duality is a conversation. Duality is Robert and his wife are two people, not one person. Reality, duality, forgive me, duality is I have an idea in my mind, and when I speak of it, you may understand it to an extent, but not completely, because you have a different mind than I do, with different assumptions, different axioms, and you understand my words, not as I intend them, but as they excite certain metaphors in your mind. Well, now we're speaking about linguistics. That's another dualistic understanding. A word can only mean what it means to you. So if I use a word, in our last conversation, I used the word Nazi. I'll use it again. If a descendant of Jews who were murdered in concentration camps hears the word Nazi, that evokes an entire realm of feelings, emotions, historical facts, and all of this. If Marjorie, whatever the fuck her name is, this idiot who's taken over American politics for the ninnies, if she says Nazi, it has none of those reference at all. It's something else entirely. She's comparing the Democratic Party to a bunch of Nazis. It's madness. That's duality. That's duality. Each of us is different. We each have different ideas in our minds. If there were truly non-duality and we humans had access to it, there was truly one consciousness, as people like to say, which is a rather absurd idea. It may be true, but we have no way of knowing it and should not assume that. Certainly should not assume it. So if there's just one consciousness, then why don't you understand everything exactly as I mean it and feel it? Why can't, if there's truly one consciousness, then why are you conscious of certain things and not others, and I'm conscious of different things and not others? If there's truly one consciousness, we all should be conscious of everything all the time.
I don't
You
know.
don't buy that. You don't buy that one, huh?
The last thing you said, well, yeah.
What's the problem? What's the problem with it?
Well, this idea of duality becoming non-duality being observed as duality in traditional Advaita, there's this idea of like the one consciousness, as you're saying it, sort of dividing into three things, and dividing into the observed, the observer, and the observing. And then there is this kind of mystical sounding thing called one consciousness. But but there's no right way of saying that. A lot like, how Lao Tzu said that the Tao that can be put into words is not truly the Tao. I feel like any attempt to describe that is utterly futile, and whether it's ever experienced is totally suspicious, because this is where it enters the realm of paradox, where language can't go, where even experience can't go. And yet I feel the way I feel like our mutual friend Chuck Hillig, he said this really beautiful metaphor that really stuck with me, that where he said religions and philosophies, they're like encampments around the void. And I feel like that's what language becomes when it tries to describe the indescribable. Like one consciousness would be one attempt at that, or consciousness being, yeah, a single thing. But as far as what you just said, that consciousness, if there was a single consciousness, it would know everything, I disagree with that, because it's more in the realm of infinite potential, and there's nothing to say or do from there. You could call it emptiness, you could call it one consciousness, you can call it God. This is my way of looking at that.
Mm-hmm. Well, if something cannot be spoken and it can't be experienced, then what are we talking about? What's the point?
Maybe there is no point. And yet I feel...
Well, Art, excuse me, there are many things about which discussing and talking has a point.
Yes.
Many things.
Yes.
Many. There's an infinitude of things that can be meaningfully discussed.
Yeah, I would say
like what shall we have for breakfast? That's
right.
Something that can be meaningfully discussed. Or is this a brain tumor? That can be meaningfully discussed.
Right.
Non-duality, from my point of view, cannot be meaningfully discussed any more than Jesus in heaven can be meaningfully discussed. It's exactly the same idea. It's an idealistic picture that's based on God, except now it's called consciousness, but it's the same thing. And it's just like wearing a cross around your neck to say I'm a non-dual, I'm a non-dualist. Oh, that's my belief. Yes, I know a lot of people like this. I've had discussions with them. Some have been acrimonious because they don't like my point of view any more than a Christian likes my point of view. It's the same thing from my point of view. From my point of view, non-duality is a religious belief that has no grounding in either experience or language, as you say. And precisely, that's exactly how I see it. The entire world is dualistic, in my experience. All of our words about it are dualistic. And so believing in non-duality is like believing in God. Can't prove that God is there. He may be, or it may be, but we have no way of knowing that. You may feel it. You've been told that since you were growing up. There's a God, there's a God, there's a God. So of course that's deeply ingrained in your awareness. There are many metaphors in your mind for God. But is there a God? Some people are sure of it. They're certain of it. Robert, how could you, when I look at the Grand Canyon, I know that there's a God, but no one but God could have designed such a beautiful landscape. Someone will say that and really mean it. That is just like a non-duality argument. It's the same language, but instead of God, it's non-duality. So I'm an agnostic on non-duality. If someone will show it to me, I may believe it. But so far, no one has.
Yeah.
And just to put the cap on it,
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of respect for Vedanta.
Yeah.
Any more than I do for Stone Age Judaism. It's the same approach. We don't really know anything, so we'll make up a lot of bullshit and then we'll teach it to our children. And now we have religion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Vedanta has no authority in my mind. None. Zero.
Well,
I'm not saying there's nothing in it. I'm not saying there's nothing in it, Art. There
right.
may be.
Right.
But if there is, you'd have to show it to me.
Right. I certainly don't mean to mention anything I mention, whether it's Advaita or some other speaker, teacher, or whatever. I would never have the intention of invoking an authority, that this is true because it came from an authority. That's not, just to be clear for anyone watching. I think you know that. But I'd like to bring things back to, I would only bring that up because it seems like a decent metaphor or approximation of a concept that maybe have some feeling of personal experience around, or maybe relevant to this discussion. But I want to bring things back to this question of duality now that you've given a really great answer to it, and you also talked about your opinions of non-duality, as some describe it. And the way that I look at duality is very literal, not just the observed and observer, but also there's two sides to our brain. And I've been studying some of this psychiatrist work, Ian McGilchrist, recently. He has some really great information about the scientific research on the different functions of the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and how one half of it, the left half, is focused on action, responding to danger quickly, and getting orders done. Basically, it's the more literal half. And then the right half is more focused on the abstract, the big picture, the wholeness, for lack of a better word. And it has more of an ability to think laterally and abstractly, and in order to and his idea is that the two halves of the brain interact with each other so as to constantly get the work that needs to get done via the left half, and then for the right half to reevaluate, okay, is that a direction we should keep going down? Or is there another way to look at this and reevaluate to have a more optimal plan of action? And I just find this dichotomy very universal in terms of yin and yang, or masculine or feminine. In the Advaita tradition, Ramana talked about the path of jnana, the path of questioning, who am I, what is this, which I feel like your books do fantastically with. This depending on no thing book, I feel like it's this, I think you used the word circumambulating. You're hitting this, you're getting at something from every possible perspective by saying not this, not this, not this. It's not, as you just did now in brief, where you said, the belief, the whole like watchmaker analogy from back in the day, that because there's a Grand Canyon, there must be a God, that created it. In the same way, people could take a leap of logic that is not grounded in anything except maybe their desire to feel safe. In the final chapter of your book, you talk about the absurdity of a life that doesn't have a plan or meaning to it. In the face of that, you could sort of embrace maybe that would be a good thing for you to explain in your own words, but I like how you describe suicide as an option, but so is a mental suicide, where you give up the sovereignty of your own observation and you just say, oh yeah, nothing exists, there's no one here. And this could be a die before you die experience, and not in a great way, more in a way that's denying what you really want to do. So I'm throwing some things out there. I'll allow you to respond to any of them now.
Okay. Sovereignty is a beautiful word, beautiful. Thank you for reminding me of it. Before I get to that, it may seem that my focus is to debunk non-duality, but really I don't walk around thinking about these things very much on that level. I find myself in this role because some people took, years ago when I said I found myself awake, some people assumed, oh, that means Robert is non-dual. Well, and then I've had to spend quite a bit of time and energy debunking the religious belief in non-duality, which I call a hypnotic trance, because it was only the early 90s when this became a fad, as I pointed out in our last interview. Before then, spiritual people didn't speak about non-duality very much. Yes, it was a topic, but a small one, very small. But I saw it rise like a comet and become a brand name. Non-dual books sold like wildfire. Things can't sell like wildfire. That's a silly analogy, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so it may seem as if I'm obsessed with debunking non-duality. I know some people imagine that, but that's not true. I find myself awake, and what I mean by awake is I don't know what any of this is, and no one else does either. Nothing. Nobody knows what any of this is. If I'm with a group of scientists and we're having these conversations, I find that they are much more open to the fact that nobody knows what any of this really is.
Yeah.
The spiritual people think that the scientists are fixed in this kind of materialistic view of the universe, but that's not true at all. Scientists are mostly not materialists. They are doubting that anything material really exists at all. And they have no idea what any of this is, and we'll tell you that. So the difference between the spiritual community, where I have one foot, and the science community, where I have the other foot, is that the spiritual people are hypnotized by a set of beliefs, so that if anything even appears to be materialistic, they say, oh no, that's not possible. It's all spirit. See, spirit is the old word, now it's consciousness is the new word, but it's the same thing. So it's this fluid somehow that we're all floating around in, except no one's ever seen it. So it's like ether in the old days. That's ether in science. Okay, so I've forgotten what you want. Oh, what did you want me to discuss?
You said you liked that I used the word sovereignty. Did you want to comment on that?
Oh, yeah, you were talking about the last chapter, depending on no thing. This is where I got into the work of Camus, who wrote about Sisyphus pushing a boulder up a hill. And whenever he got near the top and almost had the task complete, he would lose his grip and the boulder would roll down the hill again, and he'd have to walk down, get it, and start this bone-crushing work all over again. And he was going to do that for eternity. He was cursed by the gods. He was cursed by the gods because he pulled a fast one. He was dead and had to cross the river Styx. But he told his wife, when I die, don't put the drachmas on my eyelids. The drachmas were put on the eyelids to close them. And then when he got to the other side, Sharon, who's the raft guy.
Yeah.
Sharon. Yeah, never get old. Sharon would be paid with the 2 drachma, and the corpse would be conveyed there to the underworld. Well, because the drachmas weren't there, when he got to the other side, he started this story. I shouldn't really be here. I'm only a pauper, and I wasn't really dead in the first place somehow. And it's a long story. It should be read. It's a beautiful myth in a lot of ways, but I won't go into it. But he tricked the gods and they cursed him. Now you've got this unending task. Well, that unending task is what we are all faced with as humans. Metaphorically, we wake up every morning. We don't really know what any of this is. We have to jump into our lives and start dealing with stuff. We have all kinds of ideas about it. And even though we may have this faith that it all means something, we never quite get there. You've almost got the non-duality boulder to the top of the hill, and then you meet Robert Saltzman, and that's tough. And the boulder runs down again to the bottom of the hill, because maybe Robert's right. Maybe this is just hypnotic religious belief like Christianity or Islam or any of these absurdities. They're totally absurd. The idea that there's some truth in any of these belief systems is just absurd on the face of it. And people don't like to hear that, because if Judaism is absurd, or Christianity or Islam is absurd, or Vedanta is absurd, then maybe all of my beliefs are absurd, because they're all based on this foundation of belief in a higher. There's something higher. See, there's always something higher. We don't know that. We have no way of knowing that. Someone like Chuck Hillig, he's a friend of mine. He's a great guy, and he's a very funny guy.
Yeah.
But his approach to this, I find entirely circular. It's a tautology, and it can't really indicate anything. He's funny, so he manages to sell this with jokes. And like, we're all camped out on the edges of the void. Well, yeah, what does that mean? Is there a void? From the human point of view, have you ever seen anything entirely void? I don't think anyone has. There's always something.
Right.
There's never nothing.
Right.
See, I know this is the nothing channel, nothing, but there's not really nothing. It's filled with content. If it were really nothing, the screen would be blank. Yes. It sounds funny, but that's the void. But we humans can't stand the void, not even for 1 second. Yeah. As soon as we have any even inkling that there's going to be a void, we fill it in quickly with something, a thought, a feeling, an emotion, a belief. That's just the way we are. And when I say I found myself awake, that's what I mean. I understood. I'm not making this. All this stuff is just arising, and I have no idea what it is, including myself. And so now, having realized that long ago, understood it, felt it deeply, when I hear people trying to discuss these ideas as if they were facts, I can't buy it. And the scientists aren't talking about facts. They really aren't. They're talking about a point of view, probability. Yes, it's, for example, the electron, which is a basic particle in a certain way of seeing things, may have no existence at all. It's hard to actually put your finger on an electron, or time, which we just take for granted. It was yesterday and now there'll be tomorrow. Mm-hmm. This may all just be one, say, tabletop, and we're like ants crawling around on the tabletop. If we could just get up a little bit off that surface and look down, we would see it's a whole table, but we're not able to do that. We're crawling around, we can only see what's in front of us, and what's in front of us is the next moment, not last year. Last year may be here right now. I've had many experiences, psychological experiences, where I seem to be able to predict the future. Many. I mean, but I can't prove it. There's no way to prove it. unless you made a very perfect prediction in 3 years from now, a certain configuration of stuff will occur, and you write that down. Okay, the headline in the New York Times next week will be, and I write that down, and then that really happens. That would be a form of proof, but nobody can do that. So people just speculate on time, or energy, or forces, or material, or non-duality. So this is speculative.
Right.
And the thing that I came to, Art, in being awake, and I know it's audacious to say I found myself awake, but it's undeniable. I mean, I just feel it, and other people around me have told me that. That's how I got into discussing this. I was silent about it for years. I didn't want to, I was doing other things. I found myself awake, and I realized that all of this stuff that people are talking about is nonsense. Every bit of it, all of it. All the spiritual books are filled with chit chat. Some of it's interesting. Some of it may actually relate to reality in some way, but probably not. Probably not. These are human ideas that we need to tell ourselves so we can keep pushing the boulder up the hill and not fall into despair. And that's where the suicidal notion comes in. Camus asked, why not just kill yourself? What's the point? This doesn't lead anywhere. You're going to die anyway. Why deal with this frustrating and painful life filled with suffering? What's the point? And he arrived at feeling there probably is no point. It's absurd, but that's the point. The point is to be able to live absurdity, to be able to enjoy walking down the hill again when the boulder runs down. At least I'm not carrying the boulder uphill anymore. I'm having a nice walk downhill. This is a lot of fun. That's like when you're out in the bar with your friends having a drink or whatever it may be. But you do know that you have to go to work the next day, probably have a hangover too, and that's the boulder up the hill. See, and this just repeats, and it's like the Groundhog Day. We're all in it. See, Groundhog Day is Sisyphus. It's another telling of that story. The same thing keeps happening, and you just have to either check out or deal with it.
That if I may interject maybe on this for just a moment. There's a Velvet Underground song where Lou Reed sings, the song is called I'm Set Free. And during the chorus, he repeats, I'm set free, and then he says, to find a new illusion. And so this sort of leads into the Sisyphus idea, and you claiming that you are awake, as you said, a bold claim for anyone to make. Are there levels to that? Do you find yourself caught in, oh, wow, that was another dream, and then you're awake? Are there levels of this awakening you have still experienced after this shift where you were laughing on the kitchen floor, as you describe in your first book?
Yeah, well, awakening never ends.
Right.
I said that. I've said I think that's the title of it's the title of a paper I wrote years ago.
Yes.
In fact, that's how John Troy got me on his radio show to begin with. He read this on the internet and invited me to be interviewed. That was my first interview. Awakening never ends. When I say I'm awake, I mean it in an entirely human way. I mean, as a human being with the mind that we humans have, this is awake, is you have not concluded on anything, and you never will conclude until you die. This will be the boulder pushing the rock up the hill. And the truly awake person enjoys the boulder, is not trying to get it to the top of the hill exactly, because he or she knows that that's not possible. You will never really know. You will never really have the answers to these deep questions. They're not available to us. Our minds did not evolve for knowing truth. They did not. And so they cannot know truth. What they can know is chit chat, and they can cling to it. And then what happens, I study cognitive science as a psychologist. Cognitively, what happens is these patterns of knowing anything, knowing what a word means, exist on a physical level in our brains. I mean, that can be pointed to. There's chemistry going on in structure. The more experiences we have with something like that, the more those metaphors build up. And then they blind us, because as soon as we hear a word or see an experience, see something visually or whatever it is, those things are triggered. And they're highly attractive to new information that tends to strengthen them. And they're highly resistant to information that would take away some of that structure. You don't like losing structure. You like to add to structure. On the cognitive level, this is the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when I'm presented with information that adds to these attractors in my brain, I accept it. But if the information tends to remove some of that structure and make me more blank, I tend to reject that. And you pointed out a few minutes ago, I didn't pick up on it, but now I'm reminded of it, of the insecurity that we all feel, and we want something to believe in. We want some way of being grounded. We all do. I do. I like to be grounded. I like to believe in things. The difference between the awake person, I'm not just speaking to myself, other awake people I know. The difference is that the awake person never takes it for granted. You don't take it seriously. You just say, this is the way I am. Art has different ideas, and maybe his ideas are better than mine. I don't know. See, that's awake. I don't know. I don't know what you know. You may know things that I can't even understand or imagine. And I may know things like that you can't understand and imagine. Awake is seeing one's limitations. It's human limitation is part of awakeness. You don't imagine that anybody knows capital T truth. You understand that nobody can. Our brains did not evolve to understand truth. Now, just one more point. The non-dual buff will now say, well, Robert, you keep talking about the brain, you're a materialist, but the brain is not the source of all this. The brain is only a receiving set, and there's a consciousness somewhere, God or whatever it is, higher level stuff, is sending these messages to you. The brain is just a receiving set. Really? And you believe that? Why? Why? You've heard it said. That's why. You've heard it said and you like it. You don't want it to be the brain. Why not? Because the brain dies, and then you will die. And everything that you think is myself and is important and all of that, you will die. But if you believe in non-duality, you don't die.
Well,
never.
Yeah.
And that, boy, that's what you call an attractive fantasy, where attractive fantasy is like, there's no death. Death is only an illusion. No, it's a beautiful fantasy. If only I could believe in it, I wouldn't have to speak this way.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying. I could see it being the opposite as well. But I think what I mean by that is, like, one speaker who I've enjoyed listening to a lot and interacting with in the past is Paul Hederman, and he comes from a 12-step background. As I'm not sure where, if he had a lot of different mentors, I guess, but he doesn't say he's from any lineage or anything like that. But he likes to call himself like the hose, and the water flows through. The idea of being the antenna, or the brain being the antenna, to me, it could be very well what you're describing as, it could give this feeling of, oh, I'm afraid of dying and being just this. And so this gives a feeling of hope, or maybe even glorified importance, that, oh, I'm bigger than the body. I'm something bigger than that. and the body's just receiving information from what I really am, which is God or universal consciousness. But in the other sense, I think about surrender as being humility, and it's the same humility I see in science as you're describing it, where it's never landing anywhere. And there was this question, we're not quite at the point where I want to transition to other people's questions, but I do want to bring this one up because it relates to something you said about Bhakti, that I guess your friend Carol shared with you and me this morning. From your talk with your mentor, Robert Hall, you said, "I have bowed often in my heart to what I could not say. That's my Bhakti shadow." If that is a quote of yours, does that ring true as a quote of yours? Is that, and could you explain that?
Yeah, but to correct something there, Robert was not a mentor of mine.
Oh, I apologize. He was a friend.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. I don't mind having mentors. I've had them, but Robert wasn't one of them. Robert and I are dear friends.
Okay.
And, yeah. And this was a conversation that Robert and I had that I recorded when he was dying. And most of it needed to be edited out because there were a lot of confessions of various things that other people shouldn't know about and things like that. But I kept the gist of it and put it on my page years ago. And Carol saw it and loved it. Yes, Robert was a Bhakti type. And he and I were quite different in that way and influenced one another in certain ways. But what I said is that I often bow to something, but I don't know what it is, but it's my Bhakti shadow. So although I don't believe in God, I am not willing to say Robert is the most evolved presence in the universe. There may be something quite a bit larger than good old Roberto here, and I understand that. And so if I have a feeling, I'll give you an example. Sometimes I will walk along and have a certain feeling will come over me, and I will feel, thank you. And I don't know whom I'm thanking. But I'm assuming at that point that there's duality, that there's something not my mind, and it's doing what it did to give me that feeling, and I'm thanking it. But whether that it really exists in some palpable way or not, it's a mystery to me. But I do have these feelings. I mean, I can be moved to tears by a Chopin melody. That doesn't come from nowhere. Obviously, there's something going on here. I'm a skeptic, but I'm not one of these angry skeptics. I'm not an atheist. I just don't know. I don't know about any of that, and no one else does either. And see, that's the point where people don't like it. If I say, I don't know, that's fine. Then I'm just an ordinary idiot. But if I say nobody knows, then I'm not an ordinary idiot. Then I'm a major idiot. Yes. And so all of these non-duality discussions are meaningless to me. I tune out on them. I have no interest in non-duality. No interest in it. It means nothing to me. It doesn't go anywhere for me. I don't care about it. It's not what I care about. What I care about is the things that I can know about. And that's not one of them.
Yeah, so
I can't know anything about the void. If there's really a void, there's nothing. And then I'm not there to know anything about it. And this is what Chuck Hillard will not accept. He won't. I've had this discussion with him a bit. He has a rather well-defined structure. There's the void, and then there's human experience, and they're different. I don't know that. All I know is human experience. What else could I know?
Right.
What else could I know but my own experience? How could I possibly know anything outside of my experience?
You can't. You can't.
So thank you. See, you're really a bright guy, and I knew that. That's why we're spending this time. It's great hearing that from you. You can't. That's right. You can't know anything except what you personally experience. Your knowing, any knowing is your experience. It's not a fact. It's your experience. There may not even be an apple on the tree, as we were talking about. There may not be a tree. That's what we perceive. We evolved to. It's a movie. Everything that we perceive is a movie that the brain is making.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
And can we take that one step further, or maybe this is the same step, really? As you said, it's just a movie that the brain is creating, or the body, or whatever it's creating it. It's happening on its own, and then I guess, as Michael Markham likes to say, the sense of self, or the me, comes in downstream from this thought stream of thoughts, and so there is no me, there is no Art, there is no you, Robert. There is just this phantasmagoric emergence of senses and then meaning making that the brain is doing all on its own, and that we share as a part of a culture with common language and stories, and in a common environment to a greater or lesser degree. So this gives a sense of it, what Michael Markham calls the objectified consensus overlay. And yeah, there's nowhere else for me to go with that. I'm just agreeing with you, I think. But I just want to really put a point on it. This thing you brought up earlier about, you said that you had a sense that you had predicted things in the past. I was just listening to some podcast where someone was talking about how 2 years before 9/11 happened, they were lying down underneath the Twin Towers in New York, high on ecstasy, and they left a voice message to somebody saying that these towers are going down. And they didn't even remember saying that. And the person told them 2 years later. You know, I've had experiences tantamount to this myself, where something totally inexplicable, and then I tell my mom about it, and she says, "Oh, that's your psychic ability," and I wouldn't conclude that at all. Carl Jung had this word synchronicity, and you've studied Jung quite a bit. I'm curious if the word synchronicity has any meaning to you, and if you have any degree of even a theory about why those thoughts, or if it came to you, that appear to be predicting something, or if you think that's just, random coincidence.
Yeah, well, as Carl Jung thought of synchronicity, what he meant was two events that don't seem to be related turn out to somehow be related psychologically. That an unexpected event occurs, and then later you find out that it should have been expected, for example, if you had only known at the time. It's complicated, but that's synchronicity.
It's in retrospect.
I have an image in my mind of what that of a possible explanation, but I only have that because some scientist, I can't remember whose work it was, talked about this, and then it made sense to me, so I picked up on it. This is the way the mind works. See, we're not really original. We hear things, and they either take root in our brains or they don't. An idea comes, and we either accept it or reject it. So this idea, which I did not create, I'm sorry, I can't quote the author of it, was that time exists as a continuum, a kind of, as if, this is a metaphor though, as if it were a physical space. We usually are just crawling forward one pace at a time, and so we just see the next thing. But if we could stand outside of that somehow. We could go back and forth in time. And so the past is not dead, according to this theory. It's still there just as much as it ever was, except according to this idea, our limited human awareness is not really capable of exploring space-time in that sense. Space-time is vast. I mean, when we just think about the one universe that we know about, it's vast, it's infinite. And then there's the idea that there may be an infinitude of universes, like soap bubbles, that are constantly forming and bursting, and our universe is one of those bubbles. And each time we reach a decision point, a new universe bubble comes up, and this is many worlds theory. So when scientists discuss this, unlike the non-dualists, they are not sure of their ground at all. They know it's a theory. They don't say they're speaking truth. See, I'm just going to finish the non-duality thing once and for all, and then discuss something else, I hope. Anytime you see a capital T on the word truth, later for you, baby.
Yeah.
It's that simple. It's really that simple. There's no truth like that to which a human has access. No truth. It's not possible. We can't stand outside of our brains and our minds. And I'm not saying the mind and the brain are the same thing. I don't think they are. That's another topic. But we can't stand outside of our brains and minds and know it's true. We cannot. So when you say, you use the phrase universal consciousness, you say it, words just kind of tiptoe off your tongue. But what do they mean? Nothing to me. Something to you, I guess. It means nothing to me. I don't know what it refers to.
Well,
nothing. I don't know.
I don't know if I said that earlier. That's not something that has a lot of significance for me, those words, but
we've got the videotape.
well, we can
go
look
back
back.
and
Yeah,
you'll see. You did say that. At least I think you said it.
No, I probably did. I probably did say it, and I probably did say it. That's interesting. I mean, no, I agree with everything you're saying. I feel like in lieu of there being a capital T truth, there not being any capital T truth, you know, the enjoyment of our lower T truth or lower L lies to each other is where the fun of life is. This is what I just think of. This is what I think can only be described best in poetry, you know, as just kind of dancing colors, you know, where the truest things we could come up with will be seen to be utter, you know, nonsense 100 years from now or less. So we might as well just enjoy this experience of what we find enjoyable to discuss in each other's company and this sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I agree with all of that you just said, except I don't enjoy speaking with people who have their minds made up.
Right.
I really don't.
Right.
It's so boring. It's just horribly boring. I can't stand it. In fact, when someone starts talking that way, I'm out of there. Really am. And that's why years ago, I took all these gurus to task who were sitting there spouting truth, and had all the admirers. I just, come on, this is childish. These people are either they're stupid or they're profiteers or both. But there's nothing interesting in hearing somebody say, I'm 100% sure that there's only one consciousness in the universe. Really? That's quite a statement. You're standing outside the universe looking at it? I don't think so. You're not even standing outside your own mind, much less universal consciousness. That's quite a claim. It's huge. Impossible. If I spoke that way, I'd want my mouth washed out with soap. And I speak with some confidence about my own experience. It's not like I'm a shy daisy or something. I'm not. I have ideas. I'll express them, but I won't say they're true.
Right. You won't say they're derived from universal consciousness or anything of the sort.
No, I won't even say that my ideas are true. They're the way I see the world. I may run into someone tomorrow who sees it an entirely different way, and I may start to be convinced by what that person is saying.
Well,
I'm open. I haven't concluded. I'm not boring. I may be
Rob,
boring. That's not for me to say, but I'm not. I wouldn't bore myself. If I met me, I would not be bored.
I would hope so. Yeah, and I have one more question before I open it up. This one's a little bit, left field, but yeah, a friend of mine asked about your thoughts on AI, but in particular, so there's this author, I'm not sure if you're familiar, Yuval Noah Harari. He wrote a great series of books about human history and then the future of humanity, extrapolated out as best as he could. And he poses this question at the very end of his book, Homo Deus, where he says, in a future where AI can do everything humans can do better than we can, and in a future where AI understands individual humans better than they understand themselves, the question will be, this that he poses, the question will be, what do we ask the AI, period? How do we ask it to program us, essentially, if it knows us better than we know ourselves? Do you have any thoughts on this topic of what AI may hold for the future of humanity in that sense?
Well, there's an assumption there that a lot of AI people have, that an artificial intelligence will be able to do everything that a human can do.
Yes.
And I'm not sure about that at all. There are AIs already that can do many things better than any human can do, like play chess or Go, for example,
yeah.
or diagnose an X-ray to see if there's cancer in the lung or not. And AI can do this better than, maybe not better than any physician, but better than most physicians. An AI can sort through millions or billions of photographs and identify someone by name. No human could ever attain such a task, ability to do such a task. So, but, and this is a very big but, it may seem that the AI is doing something that a human can do, but doing it better. Yes, but it's not doing it the way that a human does it. The AI, artificial intelligence is not the same as human intelligence. It's based on the rapidity of calculations. It's based on being able to calculate these ones and zeros at a blindingly fast speed that we can't even imagine. Our brains are not capable of that, but they're capable of things, many things that AIs are not capable of right now. And there's no reason to think that an AI ever will be capable of them, may learn to imitate them in an AI way. But do I really want an AI to show me how to love? Why would I want that? For what purpose? For what we see, then I'd be in the matrix. And right now, see, I'm not in the matrix. A lot of my friends are, unfortunately, but I'm not. That's what I mean by awake. That's exactly what I mean by awake. I'm not hypnotized by all of this, the show. See, the show.
Right.
The show.
Well,
and see, what AI is doing so far is a show. We've got these artificial worlds that we can walk around in, but they're not real worlds. They're just a string of ones and zeros. That's all they are.
Well, I think that's
just ones and zeros. Now, you just when you talk about one consciousness or one overarching consciousness, it is possible that the universe is conscious in a certain sense, because if you take a particle like an electron, it has spin either up or down, either plus or minus. And that sounds like ones and zeros. And it sounds as if information could be encoded in those electron spins. We don't know that, but that's a possibility. And that's why I don't rule out, when somebody says the universe is conscious, I'm not ready to believe that, but I can see, even in my limited scientific understanding, which is quite limited, I can see a way that that might be possible, that information could be encoded in what we perceive as particles, which are really just probabilities. And maybe that's the way our brain works. We don't know. We don't know. So right now, AI and human intelligence are really on divergent paths. The AIs are just becoming better and better at imitating, but they're not becoming human.
Yeah, right.
They
Yeah.
can imitate. They can imitate. They can imitate. Alan Turing got at this back in the 1950s. I guess you're aware of all that. 1957.
Yeah.
If anybody's watching this and wants to look into AI, the place to begin is with Alan Turing. He invented it, and he's the guy. And you can read Turing's stuff and really get down to the roots of this in a good way.
I know a lot about Turing. I've never actually read what he wrote about it directly. Yeah, that's maybe I should. I guess I should. But yeah, I have different opinions on everything you said, but I don't necessarily want to continue down this topic. I really appreciate your response on this topic. And what I'd like to do at this point is open up the discussion to other people and what they want to talk about. And let's see, beginning with somebody in the YouTube chat, which has been very active. Michael Riley made a point that awakening also never started, and he has awakening in quotes and started in quotes. I was wondering if you have a comment on this idea of, yeah, awakening. Was there actually a moment where you were awakened or awake, or what's your reply to Michael Riley?
Yeah, that's that kind of cookie cutter spirituality. It's a statement that can't be verified. How does he know that something never began? You know that how?
Right. It's one of those traditional, going back to Vedanta type sayings, that reality is that which has no beginning and no end. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's it. So people see, this is mostly what I've been trying to indicate in this conversation and in the previous one. That's what I call it, a hypnotic trance. This person has heard these words and now they're true. And there's no way that they can be verified that I know about. And if you ask this guy, how do you know? I don't know what he would say. But he's asking me, how do I know that awakening never ends? I know it as a human being. I'm not talking about the universe. I don't know about the universe. I can't stand outside of it and look at it. I don't know about absolute truth. I don't think there is any that's available to us. I know that in my experience, there was a time in my life when I was baffled, entirely caught up in my personality, and troubled all the time by various problems and things. And then this awakening happened and all that went away. And everything is just as it is. And that's okay. That's what I mean by awake. That in this moment, things are as they are and can't be any different, including what I think, feel, and otherwise perceive. That's Robert. Robert is this. There's a problem with that statement. Maybe we can talk about that later. It's well, yeah. I don't want to complicate this.
Yeah, no, I think
you. So this fellow is making a statement, a declarative statement. Nothing ever began. Yeah, and you know that how, Charlie? How? Tell me. Where are you standing?
Well, Michael Riley, you're welcome to join the Zoom chat and ask directly if you have a follow-up question. But I think that was a great answer, Robert. So Eric has his hand raised. So I'm going to ask Eric to unmute, and he's going to ask you a question directly.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I hear you, Eric. Hi.
Hi, Robert. Hi, Art. Thank you so much for your conversation. It's been very stimulating. Robert, I saw you talking with Jim Newman recently. I don't know how old that conversation was, but I'm curious if you still believe that Jim Newman is in denial.
In denial?
Yes, I think that there was the suggestion that Jim Newman and non-duality followers are in denial of somethingness that you're sort of alluding to.
Oh, I don't think I say he was in denial.
Okay.
What I think I don't really recall. I may have said that, but
Okay.
if I did, that's not really what I meant. And I don't think I said it, but whatever. No, what I think is that he inherited this jargon from Tony Parsons and just uses the jargon, and that the jargon obscures a lot of fine points so that he doesn't really hear other people. He's just totally convinced. He's got this point of view and that's it. And he's got the words for it. And the way that he has of describing it doesn't leave any space for doubt to enter. See, it's just jargon. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. I had one other question, if I may. I'm sort of wrapped up in non-duality, and I appreciate you sort of suggesting that you're kind of a bump in the road for someone on that path, or maybe the end point on the road for someone wrapped up in non-duality. But I'm stuck with this feeling that there can't be free will if there's at the core, if there's no center, if there's no core, if it's really emptiness, then there's no free will. So how do I go about changing myself or altering negative habit patterns? Or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think very well. I don't think there is any free will in the sense that you mean it. I think we do what we must, and we feel what we must feel, and that's life. We want there to be free will because we think that this moment needs to be fixed. There's something unsatisfactory about it. This is what the Buddha was teaching. What he was saying when he said all life is dukkha, that's been translated as all life is suffering. But actually the word dukkha does not mean suffering. It means unsatisfactoriness. So there's something about life in each moment that's unsatisfactory. That's why you say, if there's no free will, how can I fix this? You can't. You have to live each moment, and that arises. You're not the doer. You're not making your feelings. You're not making your thoughts. They come to you. They come to you from outside somewhere or inside. I don't want it. That's complicated. But like non-duality, you didn't dream that up, right? You heard it somewhere and it rang a bell and you're interested in it, and that's fine. I don't mean to discourage you, but it's never going to provide free will, however much you study. In fact, non-duality, as I understand it, is the death of free will, the absolute death of free will. There's no, if we really take the non-duality entirely seriously, as if it were just the way things are, which I doubt, but if it is, if it's all one, then how are you going to stand outside yourself and fix anything? You can't.
So to borrow a metaphor from Rupert Spira, who maybe got it from Ramana Maharshi, the screen and the projector, we are the screen that's not affected or not changed by what is projected.
No, I don't say that. I know about that metaphor. That's out of Vedanta. Yeah. No, you're not the screen. You are not separate from the thoughts and feelings. They are you. You're not this blank screen, and these thoughts and feelings exist somewhere in ideal space and they're projected onto you. That's a silly idea in my view. That's
Would you say
a Vedic idea. I don't buy that. It's a metaphor that doesn't really refer to something real.
Okay.
How I experience it is my thoughts and feel. I call them my thoughts, but that's language. They're just thoughts. They're not mine. But when they arise, that is me. What I am is my feelings and thoughts and perceptions. What else is there? I mean, that's all I have access to. That's me. That's Robert. And you have different thoughts and feelings, and that's you.
So there's a beingness of it, but there's not a labeling or an ownership appropriating of it.
No, there's not a being inside us. This is being. It's not like you have a little guy in your head that's doing this. This is you. There isn't anything inside of you. It's not like nested boxes like these Russian dolls or something. No, you are. This is it. This is it. There isn't any inside and outside that we know about. I mean, there may be, but if we really, what I'm saying is, if we look deeply at experience, it's easy to understand that we're not making it. I don't know what word I'm going to speak next. You ask me a question, and then now this is coming out. There's not a little Robert in my head constructing these ideas. I mean, they're just coming. I have no idea where this comes from. And I had discussed this with Art a couple last time. I just speak, even though I know that I'm being judged. This will be seen on video and all that, and there's no Robert to intervene and cut me off at the pass. This is just the way it is. So there's a kind, in awakening, there's a kind of freedom. That's what Lou Reed was talking about in the song. There's a kind of freedom, but the freedom may be insulting to some people, because I call it my mind, but it's not really mine. I just speak my mind. And other people take it the way they take it. Some people like it, some people hate it. Some people want to nuke me out of existence for saying these things. They really do. It's true. It's amazing, shocking, but there it is.
Well, Eric, thank you for the questions.
Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Likewise.
All right.
Yeah, and what I really love about that Lou Reed lyric is he says, "I'm set free to find a new illusion." So there's a humility in there too, that he's not claiming to have the answer or have found truth. It's just, Well, so now I've unmuted Jack, and Jack has a question for you.
Robert, it's Benjamin Smythe. It's lovely to hear you, my friend. It's been a long time.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you fielding questions. The other day, you fielded a beautiful series that I appreciated your answers to. And here's where I get stuck. It feels like there's a contradiction between I don't know and no one knows. Can you explain that to me?
Yes, I understand. There is a contradiction. If you see that from a certain angle, it makes no sense at all. It's a logical paradox. But the thing is, Jack, everything is a paradox. If we look into it deeply enough, we can see the paradox in everything. The word I is a paradox in itself. What does that refer to? We don't know.
Me.
Yeah, I know, exactly. We don't know what that is.
But if
we don't know what that is.
But if I did, how would you know that?
If you did know what myself is?
Yeah, if I knew what that was, I mean, I couldn't demonstrate that other than being this.
Okay, well, see, the paradox here comes from language mostly. These words like me and this are what are they called? They're not indicators. it'll come to me. There are certain words that are self-referential, so that when you speak them, the paradox arises immediately. For example, when I say this, all there is this. Someone will say, there's nothing but there's all there is this. Okay, but what is that?
Mm.
So the word saying that means nothing because this is undefined. Well, that is what I'm saying. At root, I'm saying that when people claim to know truth, yes, how?
No, I agree with you in terms of idiocy. Like, I obviously don't know, but I don't know how I'd get to no one knows from there. But I hear you say
Yeah, because,
paradox, and the paradox then makes sense to me.
okay, well, when I say no one knows, I am making an assumption. That's true. And it's good for you to point that out. But I accept that. But the point is, there's nothing to say. Words can't even be spoken unless there are assumptions. This is what I was getting into earlier with Art in our last conversation. Cognitively, we need certain assumptions. We need at least a couple of axioms before we can ever know anything or speak about anything. We have to have words, and the words refer to ideas in our minds. Without at least a couple of ideas, we couldn't communicate. Like you and I both know what the word "I" means, except we don't know what it means. That's why I say nobody really knows. Yes, that can be. It's paradoxical. It's circular. I get that. No, I can't really know that, but I can know that nobody can state truth. That seems simple enough because there have to be these axioms at the bottom of it. I gave an example in something I wrote just a couple of days ago. Christians have a truth that they all believe in. And the truth is that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light. You've heard this, it's in the Bible. Okay. In order to believe that, a lot of Christians do believe it. In order to believe it, you have to have certain axioms. One is there's a God, and the God wants things. So there's two options, two axioms. There's a God, and the God wants things. Third axiom is the God produced the Son by immaculate conception, the human woman. And the fourth axiom is, and the Son grew up, and God gave him the task to die in order to save humans from sin. Unless you believe all of those things, you can't believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light. On what basis?
It's like a little shack.
Say it again?
Oh, it's just like they built a little shack and you just can push it over.
Yes, and that's what we all do. That's why I say nobody knows. I understand in myself the process of cognition, of knowing anything. When I went into this earlier. If I see an apple tree out there, there may not be any apple tree out there. And only on a human level there is, because our brains, our animal brains, evolved to make movies out of the energy waves, wherever they are, that's coming from what's really out there. And we have no idea what it is. Yeah. We just know the movie.
Right.
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you for your time so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure to speak with you. It really is. It was a great question.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jack / Benjamin. Rick Archer actually had a question for you I wanted to forward. I told Rick about this interview coming up, and he said he wanted to ask you, you've been critical in the past of people who charge money for some sort of spiritual teaching or non-dual or whatever. And, and I guess he had a guest last week who was a single mother that was traveling and didn't have much money, and she didn't want to charge money for her teaching, but she also needed to feed her child. And you know. And then there's another person who I know Rick has been very fond of in the past, who's been homeless for the last year or so, just relying on donations and quite often being homeless, who very easily could have made a lot of money as a spiritual teacher. So yeah, I'm just wondering if you could, and then of course there are people who have no problem at all, like raising their rates every few months, you know. I know one individual who charges, I think $500 for their awakening session, and then $200 a week for follow-up clarity sessions, I believe. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are. And so those are two ends of the spectrum. Is there a middle ground? You know, Rick Archer's question is there a middle ground or some ethical way for a spiritual teacher or mentor to charge money, in your view?
Yeah, I think there's a middle ground. I don't think that mother needs to be impoverished and just spend her time educating people for free. If she needs a bit of money, okay. My objection to this, which, you know, I should say, Rick interviewed me a few years ago, and he's a nice guy, but we disagreed on this pretty strongly. My objection is when it becomes a business, not if someone, let's say, gives a talk and asks for a donation to pay the rent on the hall or for their hotel room that they needed to travel there and give the talk. That's okay. We're all human here. But if this becomes a business, is what is my focus. I've practiced a profession, psychotherapy. I used to get a lot of money for my hours, lots. Made out really well doing it because I had a lot of wealthy clients. Now, there were timeshare salesmen and such down here where I lived. They had money to burn, and okay. But I also treated some people for free if they couldn't afford it. Those were my pro bono hours. If someone takes that attitude, that this really needs to be given away, but I need to make a living, so I'll charge some money for it, okay. The problem with it is when it comes to spiritual teaching. If I teach mathematics, let's say, and I'm a math tutor for your child, and you're going to pay me $50 an hour to sit with the kid and teach him math. Okay. I'm going to do that as a profession because I'm a mathematician and I need money. But I'm not going to change the mathematics around so that the kid likes it better and wants me to come back again next week. But that's what happens with the spiritual teachers. They may have an insight that goes against what they've been saying, but they're afraid to change because they have a brand. It's like this guy who's been giving the $500 wake-up sessions, and now he gives the $200 tune-ups. If the wake-up session was really good, I think the $500 paid for it, and now you're awake. Otherwise, it's not a $500 wake-up session. It's a subscription to pay this guy's rent for the next endless years while you're in anguish. And that's what, see, that's the problem is when it's a business, there's too much incentive to be dishonest. And you can't be dishonest about math. You either know it or you don't. But it's easy to be dishonest about spirituality because you can say anything. I can say anything. And charge for it. I really could. We got into this last time. Knowing what I know about myself and having a certain presence, which I'm an old guy now, I've developed this presence over many years. I mean, my ordinary human abilities, not some spiritual thing. If I wanted to make a racket out of this, it would be so easy. I'm aware of that. I'm not going to, but if I needed money right now, and let's say I needed an operation, and I had no money, I might call a few people up and say, I'm awake and I could tell you how to get there, just pay me. But I can't tell you how to get there. That's the point. And either can anyone else, I say. There is no spiritual instruction that wakes anyone up. All you can do is clear away the misconceptions. That's helpful. But as far as just teaching someone to be like Robert, no, you wouldn't want to. You wouldn't even want to be like me, so even if I could teach that to you. And I can't. And there's things about being Robert that are really difficult. I'm good at it because I've practiced it my whole life, suffering myself. But if now I'm going to teach you how to suffer myself, how to suffer Robert, you wouldn't like it. See, there aren't any spiritual truths, is what I'm saying, that can be taught. What I consider that I have to share is a sense of being, Someone can look at that and say, hey, that's interesting. This guy has interesting ideas, but I can't teach that. What I can say is, if you believe such and such, I consider that you're hypnotized. Snap out of it. Now pay me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I see
Yeah,
David Hall waving. He's waving at me. He's got his guitar on the wall. It's beautiful. Hi.
David does have a question for you. Yes. So, but before we go to David, there was someone else that asked a question a while ago. Chris Parkins in the chat asked, it seems here that nothing exists independent of any other things, which seems not two, but one reality appearing as two. Chris says, I can't find where I'm separate from anything, hence non-dual. How is that a belief?
Could you repeat the last part? I was reading a little note from Rita, who said she has the solution to the charging problem. Who wanted to share it. I didn't see that.
Okay.
But,
well, yeah. So
I was distracted, but so repeat the question.
Oh, that's fine. Well, I guess the crux of what Chris is saying is that if it is in fact his personal experience that he says he can't find where he is separate from anything, how is non-duality a belief if that's his experience of not being able to find where he's separate from anything?
Well, how does he separate experience from belief? Where's the line there?
Well, Chris, if you want to join the Zoom, maybe you could ask more directly, or if you have a follow-up question, because yeah, I think that's a great.
Your beliefs are your experiences are your beliefs. There's no separation. Your beliefs are an experience, just like myself is an experience. Yeah, myself is an experience. It's an indexical. That's the word I was trying to come up with. It's an indexical. If people are interested, look that one up. An indexical is a word that seems to indicate something. And it could, like I could say, see that tree over there? And I'm pointing, it's an index finger. It's an indexical, it points at the tree. That's good. But when I say this or here or me, that indexical doesn't refer to anything definable. What is this or here or me? We don't know. We can't describe it. We can't get our minds around it. So indexicals are dangerous because they make us feel that we're onto something, but we're really just going around in a revolving door. And that's what this question is like. He's saying, my experience is I'm connected up with everything. So how can there not be non-duality, Robert? Well, I think you're hypnotized, man. You haven't learned to separate your experience from the world. And you have no way of separating your experience from the world. Your experience could be entirely delusional. And if it were, no one could talk you out of it. I've treated psychotics, lots of them. You can't talk them out of it. They have a bizarre belief, a totally bizarre belief, and you will be logical. You'll spend an entire hour with them and you go around and around and you'll hear everything. And there might be a very bright person. They'll say, yeah, I get it, Robert, but I'm sure the FBI did put microphones in my shoes. See, that's, and then once you're up against that, there's nowhere you can go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess to try to relate with Chris and tie it together with what you just said, as from my own experience, you know, as I shared in our previous interview that'll get released next week, you know, I had a spiritual experience that I called samadhi at the time. And that was because I learned from Ramana this idea of samadhi, which he defines many different ways, depending on who asked him the question. And then it sort of haunted me. And I knew in advance that if something like this were to ever happen, it would. That's what everybody says. They say to not trust. I don't know. There's lots of warnings about things like that. And so I knew ahead of time that this is something to be wary of how I interpreted it. And yet there was so much relief and pleasure and free from suffering and a sense of oneness, a sense of love for all that lasted for hours. And then it didn't really make much sense to me until I read one answer Ramana gave months later, where somebody asked him, is samadhi when you experience all this stuff of love and light and oneness? And he said, no. He said, that's what happens when you identify with the body. Samadhi can't be experienced. And then I thought, oh, this comes back to the thing Chuck said about encampments around the void. And you're claiming that there is no void.
No, I'm not claiming there is no void. What I'm saying is the void doesn't refer to anything that can be experienced.
Exactly. And to me, this is exactly what Ramana meant when he said the samadhi is referring to that which cannot be experienced. And the moment there's an experience, that's not it. So
yeah, well,
in that sense,
Ramana Maharshi and I are on the same page. I mean,
absolutely.
I also say be as you are, not as you desire to be or hope to be in the future. And that's what he said. Except, see, that was the highest level teaching that this guy gave. And because so few people could really grasp it, he had to go into all these other explanations. And that's the Buddha had to do the same thing. He had different spiels for depending on the level of comprehension of the person to whom he was speaking. That's Ramana Maharshi too. He obviously had an integrated experience, a very powerful awakened state, obvious to me. And what when he boiled it down, the highest teaching is be as you are right now. That's it. Without desiring to change anything, without any of these feelings of there's still somewhere to get to. I should really have a samadhi experience. See, this ordinary experience of popcorn right. In movies isn't good enough. I need samadhi. That is what stops one from being awake. Awake is when you are with what is at the moment, without regard to the future and the past. This is it. That's human awakening in the present. I'm awake in the present. Maybe tomorrow I won't be awake. I could fall into delusion. I could start to think there's microphones in my shoes. The FBI put them in there. And then I go to the shrink and I say, I'm paranoid, treat me, and the shrink tries and fails. I've had that experience with patients. I could not cure them. They were psychotic. They needed drugs.
Well, Robert, you know, when you say Ramana did say be as you are. I looked into it and I think he might have said that once that's been recorded ever. Something he said many, many times was he would give this piece of advice for people to ask themselves who they are, who's asking the question. This was his most common response, apparently, was to just tell people, well, find out who you are, ask who you are. So, which seems kind of different from saying just be who you are. He would say, find out who you are. Ask yourself, who am I? So what are your thoughts on that piece of advice that Ramana gave very frequently?
Well, that's what I was saying earlier in the conversation when I was talking about indexicals, and is when you say I think I said this to Jack, I don't quite remember. What do you mean by that? When you say I, what is that? That's the same thing. That's what I'm saying. You use this word, and yet you've never looked into it. It's a word that you were taught as a child that refers to this, but you don't ever ask yourself, what is this? That's the whole point. You just take all that for granted. Oh, I'm me. Of course, I'm me. I don't look into it. That's the axiom. And what does that mean? Does it mean this body? Does it mean this brain? Does it mean all this information, all the people I know, all the planets and stars in the universe? What is me? So that's an open question. And yes, that's so. When I say that Ramana Maharshi and I are on the same page, that's what I'm talking about. Exactly. I'm looking into at all times. Who's speaking? What is this? When Robert speaks, who's speaking? Where do these words come from? Who am I? What am I? These are questions that can't be solved. And that's why he says, be as you are. I don't know if he just said it once, but if he did, he probably said it to some really bright person who was there and was ready to just get it, because that's a very high level. See, that's not easy, because we don't want to be as we are. We want to have a bigger penis or whatever. That's the truth. That's the way humans are. We don't want to be the way we are. We want something better. We all do. Everybody does. I have a backache that I've had for years since I broke my back. I don't want to have that. I don't want to be as I am. I want to be as I am without the backache. I want to be as I am without being overweight or whatever it is. Everyone has a little nugget in there about oneself that really they wish could change into something else. And the truly wise among us, like a Ramana Maharshi, they get over that. They don't feel that way. They just sit there in the diaper and everything's cool. See, and that's what I'm saying about myself. I'm a human being like anyone else. I've got my doubts and fears like anyone else, except I'm willing to just be with them. I don't wish they would change into something else, because I know they can't. They are what they are in each moment. It is what it is. You can't fix it. By the time you notice it, it's gone. You're on to the next thing. So if you're always trying to do the repair work, you're repairing the past, which can't be done. Can't fix it. It is what it is. You see, that's so simple. And it's not a spiritual teaching. See, it's not something that someone has to believe. Anyone who hears that can just look at it and say, is Robert right? There's no way I can fix myself, because by the time I notice what's wrong now, I'm on to the next moment. Seems clear. If I'm angry now, I'm angry. The anger happened. The bad word came out of my mouth. I can apologize for it later, but I can't fix it. Can't take it back.
Yeah.
If I see a rattlesnake, there's a lot of them around here. If I see a rattlesnake and I have this fear and it comes up, that's it. It's over. I can't now make myself unafraid. It doesn't work that way. It happened. Shock to the system. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And so
great.
the awake people I know, including myself, although this sounds like a contradiction because I'm speaking this way, are deeply humble, like a Ramana Maharshi. They know that they're not in control. They know that this is all arising and that myself is part of the arising. It's not something that you can get a grip on. So that instruction, see, that instruction, find out who I am. That is upaya. That's skillful means, as the Buddha called it. It's a koan. It's giving you a problem that you can't solve. And eventually you keep working on the problem and you get to the point where you say, I can't solve that. And then you're awake in the present.
Wow.
That's what I'm saying. Without offering it as a teaching. It's not a teaching. If someone is willing to do that work, if someone's able to do that work, wake up every morning and say, who's having breakfast here? Good. You may get somewhere. Maybe you won't. And you don't have to pay me. I want to read, but I want to read what Rita Raja or Raja.
Yeah, please.
She said, and this is good. Charging the fee is legit. The twist is when it gets institutionalized and a whole whack of BS emerges and seekers end up spiraling down the random rabbit holes. That's it. That's it. That's a really good answer. That's a really good answer.
Yeah, thank
when
you,
it's
Rita.
institutionalized, and then we have non-dual seminars. See, not just a conversation, but it's a non-dual conversation. That's an institutionalization of an idea, and it becomes a brand. I once joked that I was going to make a non-dual cookbook. No ingredients but flour.
Yeah, that would sell.
I don't think there'd be too much to eat there. Pretty dry.
Be a good coffee table book. Well, so David Hall has his hand raised for a while now, so go ahead and unmute yourself, David, and feel free to ask your question.
Oh wow! Thank you so much. And Robert, it's phenomenal to be with you. And I'm not familiar with your work, but I'll start looking more into it. But just a quick question: do you, going back to the concept of infinite potentiality? Are you familiar with anything around other fields of consciousness, like through channels, people that are channelers that seem to go and bring through them information from other dimensions? Is that, I'm sure you've looked into that.
Well, yeah, I certainly am familiar with the concept of channeling. Let me say first, it's a pleasure to meet you. I see your guitars on the wall, and it's always, that's always beautiful to me. I love guitars a lot. They're beautiful.
Yeah.
This is what we were discussing earlier in the conversation about how time may not be a flow. It may be space-time is like an object. It only seems like a flow to us because we're moving through it, but it's there, right? And we're just going, sure, I don't know. People might have access to all kinds of, I was saying I had access to inside information. It seemed to me, I can't prove it, but it felt convincing that I had, say, thought of a word that I had never really thought of before, and then later in the day I encountered that word in something that I was reading, as for an example of out of time. But there's also a reasonable explanation for it also, because how about all the times that I've read words and didn't encounter them later in the day? That would be a contrafactual argument. But in any case, sure, if somebody has information, I don't know where they get it. I don't know where I get mine. If somebody wants to call it channeling, that's a word. But
Yeah.
when somebody says, well, I'm in contact with this other entity called Seth, and Seth speaks, then I just start to think this sounds a little bit like marketing. It's like A Course in Miracles. This Helen Saltzman wrote this book, and she claimed it was channeled from Jesus or something like this.
Right.
And sold millions of dollars worth of books and everything. That's a bit iffy. But can information come from realms that we don't know anything about? Probably, possibly. I don't know. Could.
So, I mean, if I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, because Jack, I really enjoyed the way Jack asked his question of you. As in, he was asking what was missing in that link about between the person that says that they know truth with a capital T and having to prove it. If the proof is in another conscious dimension and you don't see it, then there's no way that can be proved to you. I mean, there's no proof in this in what we call this 3D thing, the guitars and the walls and things like that. But you're hitting so close to the fact that what is in the now moment is just what is. If what is only source, you are source, the guitar's a source, I'm source, we're all the same thing all at once, then I mean, I can't prove that to you, but I know that that's true.
Well, you see, I respect that you feel that you know that's true. I understand that. We all have axioms or assumptions that we believe, although they can't be proved. We all have them. You can't function without that, really. No one can. But you have a brain and your guitar doesn't. And to me, that's a vast difference. You can play the guitar. The guitar cannot play you. The guitar cannot now put words in your mouth. It's hanging right behind your head there on the wall. But the guitar cannot influence you in any way. But you can influence the guitar quite easily. Just take it down and move the strings around and music will come out. So I don't see that as one thing, not at all. I see it as two entirely different things. Yes, you're made of molecules and so is the guitar, if you want to look at it that way. And some of the molecules in that wood might evaporate off the wood and end up in your mouth and then become part of your body. That could happen. So you're non-dual in that sense, in the sense that you're both made of the same stuff, but you have, I hesitate to use the word soul, but I will in this case. Your intelligence gives you a sense of being, and that's a nice looking guitar, but we could take that one away and put a different guitar in there, and there wouldn't really be any difference if it was a nice guitar like this one. But I can't take you away and put another human in there and say there's no difference. And that's the difference.
Yeah, but
yes.
In the realm that everything is only frequency. It's vibration. It's in quantum physics. I mean, they've proven that it's only frequency. All that we see before us is a frequency of different resonances. The guitar is at a different resonance than I am, but it's still all the same. It's still all of the same. There's only one note source that is everything that is. It's just all vibrating at a different frequency.
Yes, you can look at it in that way, a point of view, but there are other points of view. I just presented one.
Sure.
They're also valid. They're also valid. It depends on what level are we speaking about. If we're going to speak about molecules, then that's one thing. If we're going to speak about quantum physics, then there aren't any molecules. There's only probability waves. So then we're in a different world where molecules are only a fiction.
Correct.
So if we're going to speak about Robert Saltzman's life, that cannot be explained in terms of molecules. I'll give an example here. I have a brain.
But yeah, but
The brain is made of molecules.
correct.
Right. Okay. But the molecules can't decide anything. Each molecule is identical to another. Let's not pick molecules, they're different. Let's take positrons. There's an unbelievable, inestimable amount of positrons in my brain right now, and they're having an effect. They're working, they're doing things, but they don't create thoughts. It takes the complexity of the entire brain to produce a thought. So if you're on the positron level, you can say it's non-duality. But if you get onto a higher level or a different level, there has to be structures that are different from just explained by particles. So it's a movie that we're seeing that seems to have causality in it, but the causality can't be explained by these particles bouncing around. The causality comes from a different level. We don't know where it's coming from. It's a mystery to us, but we feel caused to do things. We feel impelled to do things. And you can't explain that by saying 80 million positrons ganged up on me and forced me to say a bad word. I mean, it doesn't work that way. So, but a non-duality view would have to say that there's no difference between Robert and a positron, the way that you're describing it. And I don't live on that level.
No, I totally agree. But you're saying what you keep referring to what is.
Yes, what is for me emotionally.
Well, what? But
cognitively, all that I am, all that I know that I am, is what I notice.
Correct, and that's all there is.
That's Robert. Robert is noticed, is whatever is noticed, and I call it in this space. The two of us can go to a baseball game, and I notice one thing on the field, and you notice something else entirely. We're sitting side by side.
That's true.
Maybe the game is boring, so I'm looking at the blonde in the third row. That sounds like something I would do. And you're thinking, was that a curveball or a slider? See, that's why there's no non-duality on the human level. Whether there is in the level that Art was referring to before, that he called, I forget, some kind of consciousness.
Universal conscious. Yeah, I was.
Universal.
You could call it,
yeah.
or what Chuck called the void, or some people call God or love, or nothing. Some people call this nothing. People describe this as fingers pointing towards the moon that can't be put in words like that.
Yeah, it is the what
That's
is.
okay.
It is only the what. It is only the.
Oh, sorry, I just muted you, David. But Robert, you were trying to say something?
No, put David. Okay, I'll say something and then put David back on if you have time.
Yeah.
That is what I was referring to before, and you said you can point to it, finger pointing to the moon. That's an indexical, and the problem with indexicals is that they're undefined. They're only defined by the context. So if I say me, what do you mean by me? When Chuck says the void, what do you mean by the void, Chuck? Show me one. Show me a void. He can't. And so you can talk about this stuff forever, and other people can say, ah, yes, Chuck Hillig, he's got it, or Robert Saltzman, not to pick on Chuck, I like Chuck, but he speaks with an assurance that for me is over the top. He always has since I met him. He's quite sure. He's got a vision of the world, and that's the way it is. And he's quite sure of non-duality and the void and all this. And I'm not.
Oh, I wish Chuck was here to defend himself. Where are you, Chuck?
Let me just, I'll let somebody else go, but I just wanted, all I'm trying to say is that the what is, that's all there is. That's what I think, that's my other way of trying to say what Art is saying. There is only what is.
No. You see, that's a bridge too far, in my opinion. There's only, all there is for you is what you notice. That doesn't mean you notice all that is.
I know I don't.
But you see, that's where it's a good conversation we're having, because that's the point. The point is that someone will take his or her own experience and say, my experience defines reality. All there is what I notice. All there is this. They'll say, all there is this. Yeah, all there is for you is whether it's a fastball or a slider. And all there is for me at that moment is the blonde in the third row. But meanwhile, there's 80,000 people in the stadium, and they all have different viewpoints of what is.
Right.
And
Well,
you see, yes, and this is so important, because all there is this.
Robert, I want to. Yes,
Go ahead.
I hear what you're saying, and I want to attempt to encapsulate and clarify a certain kind of jargon, as you've referred to it in the past, of what I call, loosely the lineage of Tony Parsons. There is a certain languaging that has become commonplace, and part of it is to describe what is. I think I've heard this from Kenneth Madden. He says this quite often in his meetings. This is a meeting about what is, or we're describing what is, and this is another one of those placeholders. Like, in lieu of calling it universal consciousness or God or whatever, people will say there is only what is, and they will go as far to say, like I've heard, it is this meeting, it is this Zoom call, it is what this body is experiencing. But as Jim Newman said in his conversation with you, those are the things that are apparently arising. This is something that I think Tony started this languaging. There is an apparent arising of Jim Newman caring for his wife, as you asked him in that interview. But there is only what is, and similar to how you were saying at the start of our discussion, what truly is, or who I truly am, are unknowables. So that's what they're pointing to when they say there is only what is, as far as I can tell. And that might still just be a languaging that you feel like is disingenuous or misleading. I don't know, but I think that's what they're talking about when they say there is only what is. They do mean the human experience, but at the same time, they mean what that really is unknowable, in a sense. It's not an intellectual thing. It's an experience. I don't know. I can't say more than that. I'll bring up two more things, and then maybe you could find a way to tie this all together, because I feel this is all related and a nice way to wrap up. The one time I spoke with Tony Parsons on the phone for 10 minutes, I think he repeated the exact same phrase 10 times verbatim. It's something like, this is no thing apparently happening. And he would say that again every minute. And it was funny. It was almost like a joke that went on too long, where you just start laughing at it. But that's his message. This is no thing apparently happening. And then Jennifer wrote in the chat, going back to Ramana and the whole be as you are quote, Jennifer wrote, when Ramana said be as you are, Jennifer thinks he was talking about being nothing or the self, and that he was not referring to acceptance of the body and mind, or perhaps the experience of the body and mind. So yeah, what's your response to that, Robert?
I don't think Jennifer has any idea what he was referring to. How could she? How? This is what we're discussing here. The thing like a Jim Newman is that he puts himself at the center of reality. And so when he says all there is this, he means my experience is all that exists. It's solipsism. It's solipsistic. It's a stage that children go through as they become teenagers. It's a question. We've all been through it, where you look at the world outside and you say, that's all inside of me. And so maybe I'm the only thing that really exists, and these other people are just figments of my imagination. It's a stage that we go through intellectually. I don't say all there is Robert, which is what all there is this means. That all there is what I think, feel, perceive, and cogitate. That's what Jim Newman is saying. He's saying my love for my wife is just an apparent arising or something like that. I don't say that. I say I'm a human animal and I'm madly in love with my wife. And that's one of the least illusory things I can imagine. Love is one of the realest things that one can experience. In my experience, if someone else has a different experience, it's fine. But I don't make my experience the be all and end all. I don't make it the definition of reality. And that's where I part company with all these so-called teachers. They make their experience factual, and everyone else has to learn from them. And it's bizarre. It's a hypnotic trance. They're in it, and so are their followers, from my point of view. It's simple. To me, it's simple. I don't make my experience your experience. I don't say that you should have my experience. I don't say that you should come to me and learn how to be human from me. I don't have any secrets.
Well, Robert, on that note, I would like to ask you one final question that it's kind of a follow-up from our previous interview, or just a repetition for people who haven't heard it, because I really liked this point that you made in that towards the end of our discussion, and you just touched on it now. So I feel like it's a perfect way to close. Although I do want to say I wish Jim Newman was here to defend himself as well, and that might not be the way he would characterize his view, but I'm only going to say that and leave it at that. But you said in our previous talk that you are not a teacher and that you don't want people to follow what you say or agree with what you say. And then you make this other point where you say life is the teacher. You say life will always show you what to do next. And I was wondering if you would like to comment on those two statements you made.
Sure, but Jim Newman and I had a long conversation, which has been recorded. It's available. I don't have it, but it's available somewhere. So
it's on this channel. Yes.
And I think it was a good conversation. I think the two of us gave one another a lot of space. I certainly wasn't negating him. I wanted to learn what I could from him. And yeah, I think he gave me the same consideration, although he's kind of trapped from my point of view in jargon. And so it's hard for him to snap out of that and just talk. But
right.
Okay, why I say I'm not a teacher, I just said it a few minutes ago. I have no secrets. I'm an ordinary human being, and I'm living my life as best I can. I'm kind of a bright guy in my way, and I've read a lot and learned a lot. I've known some really bright people in my life, scientists and theologians and all of this. I've gathered together what I could, but it doesn't amount to anything. It's just my point of view. I have one. People find it interesting. Some people do, other people hate it. That's life. I'm not a teacher. You can't come to me and awaken. It's not like that. If you read one of my books, both of them, I hope you read, at the end, I think you will know less than you thought you did when you started reading. And that will be helpful to you personally. But that's not a teaching. That's a deconstruction. So in the sense that deconstruction is valuable, you can say Robert is a guru of deconstruction. Then everybody goes, oh yes, Robert. And what I'm saying is Robert's nothing. Robert's just another guy with opinions and a point of view, and has not shy. I'm not shy to express them because I'm 76 years old, for Christ's sake. I'm going to die soon. Why not? Why wait? So that's all it is. I am not a teacher. I can teach things. I could teach photography, but I mean the nuts and bolts of photography, how to focus the lens and all that. But I cannot teach someone to be awake. Cannot. And I wouldn't even do it if I could, because it's actually a mixed bag. Might not like it. It has a downside. Everybody wants that. Oh, I want to be awake. I don't know. You might not like it. You won't be proud of yourself anymore. It won't happen. There's no one to be proud. There's just this.
Just this.
Yeah, I just use an indexical. I think intentionally. Because yes, you get that. See, that's what Jim said. Jim Newman says, there's only this. And everybody goes, yes, he's so bright. He's so turned on. He's so awakened. Really? Now tell us about this. What is this? Let's hear it. Just what you think and feel, or Tony Parsons came up with, or is there actually some vast thisness to which you have access and the rest of us don't? See, these are questions. I have no answers.
And why do you describe life as the teacher, or you said life will show you what to do next?
Well, that's my experience. My experience is that I've bumbled through. I've made it for 76 years without having some instructor standing over me telling me what to do next. So where is that knowledge coming from? It's coming, I say, from being a human animal who's the result of countless years of evolution from a tiny one-celled, barely conscious being into this, which is a large brain mammal. There's a lot built into that brain that came through the DNA and came through knowledge of what people said before. That's life. I'm embodying that along with 8 or 9 billion other people on the planet. That's life. There are many things we know how to do without being taught, after all. That's life. Life is the teacher. No one ever told me how to move my lines in quietus. It just happened. That's life. That's the basic life. That's the center of evolution right there. Who can do it and who can't get late. That's what it's all about. And we deny that, see, but that's how we got here. We had ancestors, the ones who couldn't make those thrusting movements, but they didn't have any offspring. And so their DNA isn't in the gene pool. It isn't in the genome. And if we understand that, that's what I mean on the physical level about that life is a teacher. If I reach out and touch the stove, if I touch a hot stove and burn myself, I won't touch that stove again. That's life taught me that. No one came to me and said, see, Robert, you touched a hot stove, now you're burned. Never do that again. Not at all. That just happened.
Right.
It's all just happening. And what I say is it's all just happening if someone can get out of the way. If we take, that's a little too extreme. To the extent that we can get out of the way, then it's more natural. Let me put it that way. That's a fairer statement. To the extent that we can forget what our beliefs and our assumptions, then our perceptions become more accurate. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. If I have long hair, and I used to have a beard when I was a very young musician and all this, I got spit on a few times walking down the street because people didn't see Robert. They just saw these. It was their ideas. Oh, that's just a hippie, stupid hippie. And it made them angry. Or someone may have dark skin and be in a place where most people have light skin. And they'll say, oh, that's just a dark person, or whatever they say. You know the word, I'm not going to repeat that. It's horrible. And human beings are trapped in this shit, man. Well, I'm telling you, I don't see that way. I don't see people's color. You know, I'm a photographer. I see every tone that there is. I'm a black and white photographer. I know black from white. But when I look at you, I don't see a white person. I just don't. That's what I mean by awake. I wrote about that. There's a chapter 50 in Depending on Nothing. It's all about identification by sexuality and gender and race and all that. It's a dead end street. Never even consider it. And I went into that chapter about, oh, it's easy for you to say that, Robert. You've got the preferred skin color. Well, yes. So somebody can say, yes, you don't have to consider it. You're a white man, and I have to consider it because I'm a dark-skinned woman. Yeah, I get that, and that's true, and I accept that. But I mean inwardly, when we consider these things that we were talking about today, that we've been discussing today, we don't need to identify. To the extent that we're able to not identify with my thoughts and feelings, we can actually see the world. My thoughts and my axioms are like tinted glasses. They force me to see things in terms of them. If I give that up and I don't value it, I can take that off. If I don't say, I'm a Christian, throw it away. Don't be a Christian, be a human. Be a mammal. And then you'll see things more as they are. And you won't think that sex is bad. You won't. You'll see you're an animal. You have every right to fuck, whether you're a Christian or not. See, this is beautiful. This is really beautiful, if you can stand it. But many of us, is I'm saying, cannot stand that. It's too insecure. It's free fall. Without defining oneself, it feels scary. I might be nuts. I have no framework. See, Robert Saltzman may be out of his mind. You want me to teach that? How to be crazy? I don't know if you're getting this. It's a metaphor, but it's our beliefs that we cling to that keep us from facing depression, confusion, impermanence, and all these things that are actually part of life. But we have something to cling to. See, Jesus will take care of it. Or I'll never die because I was never born. Or these silly ideas that we use to blind ourselves to the realities of life and death. And racism and love and all of the rest of it. These things are hard. It's hard to take. It's really hard to take it in. And so most of us don't take it in. We make a belief system and we see the world through the tinted glasses. And when I say I'm awake, I guess this is the last words. I mean that the glasses fell apart. It happened. There was a day, just like you had the Samadhi experience. I believe you. I had an experience where I saw the world without myself as the doer of anything. All of this is just arising, and including myself. I can't stop it. I'm not making it. It's just here. It's just what it is. And that's a paradox because that's the indicator word. It's undefined.
Wow.
I have spoken, oh great one. That's the end.
Well, thank you for being here, Robert, and thank you for everyone that stuck with us. We went over time today, and I think for a good reason. I feel like this was a really special conversation that warranted the extra time. And I really appreciate everyone who engaged with their questions and everyone who just watched, everyone watching on YouTube after the fact. And Robert, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure, amigo. Get out there and have some fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.